What's up and welcome to Ahead of the Curve. I am Jonathan Gellner, and thank you so much for joining us. Today we have on the Toronto Blue Jays minor league hitting coordinator, Hunter Mense. Hunter was born in Liberty, Missouri, and went on to attend the University of Missouri. After 3 years at the University of Missouri, he was drafted in the 17th round by the Florida Marlins. So after his playing career, he went back to Missouri and served several roles, including an undergrad and graduate volunteer assistant coach and color commentator on the team's radio broadcasts. He then made the jump back to pro ball with the Padres for 1 season, and then the Blue Jays as the AA hitting coach, and now as the hitting coordinator. On the show, we discuss what the process of making changes with players looks like. We go over the process of experimentation coupled with communication, and we discuss his role as a coordinator, which essentially coaches coaches. You're going to love this episode with Hunter Mense. Hunter, welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me, Jonathan.
Definitely. And we're spending some coffee with Hunter this morning, and we've got you on the mic, and I'm really excited to get to dig into not only you, but what you guys are doing as an organization that you can share with us. And for our listeners who want to get to know you a little bit better, like I do, can you give us a short snapshot of your baseball background and why you decided to hop into coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Liberty, Missouri, which is a little suburb outside of Kansas City. I went to the University of Missouri, played there for 3 years. After my junior year, got drafted, and I ended up playing in the Marlins organization for about 5 years. Once I got done, kind of towards the end of my career, I kind of had this idea that, well, I still had a couple years of school left, so I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I thought coaching was where I wanted to take it. So ended up going back to Missouri as an undergraduate assistant. And for 2 years, my first 2 years back, I was an undergraduate assistant. So I would work with guys during the season or during the week, and then during the weekends when games would go on, I would go up in the booth and be a color commentator on the radio, which was an unbelievable experience. And then the 2 years after that, then I hung on and I was a graduate assistant, got my master's in counseling psychology with an emphasis in sports psychology. During that same time, coaching still, and then still doing some radio. And then my final 2 years I was at Missouri, ended up being a full-time assistant. So then ended up recruiting, still doing the hitting stuff, got out of the booth, obviously, but much more ingrained into coaching then. And I realized then that it was something I really wanted to do. And then made the jump to professional baseball with the Padres for 1 year in 2017. I was a short season hitting coach in Tri-Cities, Washington, in Pasco, and did that for a year. And then Blue Jays called. I took a job with them as a AA hitting coach in 2018, and it was it was a really awesome introduction to AA baseball and to the Blue Jays. I show up the first day of spring training, and in our group we have Vladdy Jr., we have Bo Bichette, we have Lourdes Gurriel, we have Kevin Biggio, we have the absolute dudes. And it was a really fun year. We ended up winning the championship that year, and then spent that year in New Hampshire. And then the next year we had our hitting coordinator got bumped up to the big league job, and they interviewed me for that job. And so in 2019 was my first year as a hitting coordinator, and then this year will be my second year. But to get to your question of kind of what got me into coaching, I think I think there's a couple pieces. I think the things that I really failed with as a player, and what I really struggled with, and what I felt like I could have helped myself with, or simple things like that is part of the reason. And then I think too, just like the passion that I have for hitting, the passion that I have for coaching, and the passion I have for being around players and helping people to get better. I think I've got that from my mom. My mom's brilliant and tremendous, and being able to help, and she's kind of taken me under her wing when it comes to developing and coaching. So that's kind of given me the love and the passion for it, and it's a job that never feels like a job, but it's something that I've thoroughly enjoyed. So
Well, that's wonderful to hear, and it's something that, man, it's tough right now because I feel the same way. I'm like, man, I got into it for building relationships, and for me, I was basically, besides a couple of mini camps, 3 weeks on the job, and then it's like, okay, well, now we've got to try and conduct those over Zoom calls, which obviously we're pretty blessed to be able to do that, but at the same time, I'm like, man, I miss the face to face interaction for sure. But for your transition from a hitting coach into a coordinator role, now for our listeners who are curious what the difference is, and for me, I've explained this a couple of times, and I think it's you go from coaching players to now you're using the organizational's philosophies and coaching the coaches how to coach the players, or at least helping them in the best way possible, and then helping them, especially new coaches, to understand what is important to you guys as an organization and different things like that. So basically, I think you go from coaching
Yeah.
coaches to coaching players. And so, what are some different challenges that you have, and how have you taken those head on?
So it's a great question. I think you explained kind of what the job entails perfectly. But
Okay.
I think when I first got into this job, um, it was really challenging for me for the first really like the first 4 or 5 months. And I think the biggest challenge was I was so used to working with players, and the coaching that I had done it was always with, like mid 20s to lower aged kids. And it was always fun, and it was in the cage and grinding with guys every single day, and you had your team of guys. And and when I first got the coordinator role, I was still looking at it as kind of being that way. And until I realized that that wasn't it at all, that wasn't what the coordinator position entailed, I really struggled with it because I wanted so badly to get in the cage and get with guys, and because it was something that I felt like I did a really good job of and what I really enjoyed doing. So I would get to like an affiliate, go to an affiliate, and I had to like take a step back because I wanted to get in the cage so bad, but I also remembered that feeling of one as a player, but then as a coach too, when a coordinator would come in town, and how tense everybody would become, whether it's the coach or the players. And I would watch how the coordinator would step in and come into the cage and start working with guys, and it would take guys down the wrong path sometimes. And it always felt like there was lack of communication from the coordinator to the coach, to where when they came in, they would start working on something that was completely different than what the coach had been working on with the player. And it would take like 2 weeks after the coordinator left, because they're only there for 4 or 5 days. And it would take like 2 weeks before the player would get back to doing what they had been doing before. So I didn't want to experience that, and I didn't want to be on that side of it. So then I started thinking, I was like, there's a cool opportunity here when I started to see it differently, that we have this group of coaches. We've got our basically like 8, 9 hitting coaches that we have from the very top to the very bottom. And we have a great opportunity. I can look at it differently now. Instead of having a group of hitters, I have this group of coaches that we get to work with, and we get to be our own team, and we get to build something up together. And it was really nice too, because I had a great relationship. I still do have a great relationship with Guillermo Martinez, who was our hitting coordinator before, who's now the big league hitting coach. And we kind of had the same beliefs and the same ideas. So that transition made it a lot more smooth. And then once I started to kind of think about it, is from more of a 30,000 foot view, instead of being right in it like I had always been used to. And then just building and thinking about how we as the coaches could help build something up, and we could build um, our hitting program all together. And once we kind of started doing that and having that mindset, and I had to start thinking, I was like, man, if I'm drawing out this pie graph, talking to and working with coaches is probably 95% of what I'm doing. That other small 5% is working with players. And at first, when I started to think about it, I was like, man, that really sucks. I really enjoy working with players. But then I started thinking about it, I was like, working with coaches is the same thing. It's just different sorts of people, different types of people that want different things too. And we can have an extreme impact on the players if we do it the right way. But there was always times where I was like, I feel like I could step in the cage and do something, and we could help and we could do things, but it was always trying to go through the coach, and the coach and I working together to try and help out the player. And I found that was kind of the best model to do it, because I think then my ideas as coaching players was always trying to empower the players as much as possible and help them to kind of have that feeling of figuring things out on their own. I've taken the same approach now with the coaches, is helping them to figure stuff out on their own, to where they can then be empowered and they can feel like they have the power to do the things they want to do with players. And so that's the first piece. And I think the second piece too is what you talked about with having the organizational philosophies and principles that we do within the organization, and then just having everybody work together within that same kind of cog and mindset to help filter that through the organization. So, and I think too that it's creating the culture and creating the environment and building relationships with everybody and building up the team the way that we expect the same things out of our coaches at their own affiliate levels too. So it's a fun job. I'm telling you, like for the first like 3 months, 4 months, I was like, man, I don't know if I really like this. But then when I started to see the challenges as a different challenge and not as being a hitting coach, then I started to really learn and really love different aspects of it.
Right. Yeah. It's sometimes it's tough to critique your peers too, a little bit, or at least like going from someone that's working with all of those guys to someone who now you're their boss in a sense, right? And so that's always an interesting dynamic. And so I loved hearing you working through those different things, and I loved getting to hear that, just some of the challenges that you faced and what you've done with them, because I think that for the most part, a lot of people go through those, which is really, really cool. And so one of the biggest parts of your job is communication, because again, you're not necessarily working with players every single day. And so I think that being a coordinator involves a ton of communication with not only the coaches, but with the players. But is that something that you really try and focus on? And then if you do, what are some different ways that you found to do that well?
It's a great question. And I think the relationship communication piece is probably the biggest piece. And it reminds me a little bit of when I was at Missouri and I was recruiting, and how much you're on the phone and how much you're talking to people and trying to gain information on different players around the country, and talking to their coaches and talking to other coaches to get leads on other players, and just how busy you are on the phone. And that's kind of how this job has been too. And I really enjoy it because we try as much as we can, even during the season, to have Zoom calls. We try as much as we can to have just meetups, so that we're, as an organization, all kind of starting to speak the same language or talk the same language, so that it makes sense to all of us when we're having conversations. So we have the group conversations as much as possible. And then during the season, like during spring training is, and this is a whole different challenge too, but during spring training, you're around each other all the time, right? So the conversations that we get to have and how we communicate are so easy. And in a normal job where people are in the same building and you're managing a bunch of people that are in the same building, the language and the philosophies, they all just kind of start to blend together, just the drip process, because you're always around each other. You're having these conversations. It's natural.
Right.
And it's easy for us during spring training, and it's easy for us at the end of the year when we have instructs. But during the season, it's way more challenging, obviously, to do that, because nobody ever sees each other. After spring training ends, it cuts off, and boom, everybody goes their separate ways. And our AAA hitting coach, Corey Hart, might not ever see our DSL hitting coach, Peter, for the next 7 months. So we try as much as we can to help still build those conversations, so that we can create a learning environment from top to bottom. But then on the other hand too, it's like I'm still in contact with those guys. At least there's some sort of touch point at least every other day with all of them. And it's not always about players either. And really the small parts are about players. It's usually just having conversations to see how guys are doing, see if there's anything that they need, seeing if there's anything that we're lacking or we're missing, or where we can start to fill the gaps and fill the holes. And I think that's probably the biggest piece. And then there's even the communication piece that's above me too. So we have our farm director, we've got a GM, we've got a big league hitting coach, we've got all the people that are above me that I'm communicating with, and then trying to filter things to get those things to the coaches to then get things to the players too. It's this cool trickle down effect, but there's constant communication. And during this quarantine time, it's been really fun and really cool for all of us to kind of step back and look at some of the things that we needed to accomplish and needed to get done as a group that probably don't get done whenever we start playing games. So there have been some things that we've been able to do that have been fun projects for all of us. And it's created and helped build the relationships between all the hitting coaches and myself included, and some of the other people within the organization that come in on some of those calls.
Oh, really cool. Really cool. And so, okay, so let's run through a hypothetical situation. And we're talking about communication, and the players that you get to work with every single day are professional baseball players. And obviously they're getting paid, and obviously they're some of the best in the world. But as you know, they also have some things that they need to work on every single day. And sometimes they may not want to do those things. So walk us through what a conversation would look like. Let's say that you have the hitting coach's blessing, because you've obviously you said that you want to go through the hitting coach first, but you guys have talked about it, and you're working with player X, and you're wanting him to make just a swing change, or maybe you're working through some data and you notice that he's doing this a lot, and you think that is caused in part by a swing change. And so what does that conversation look like? And I don't mean to sound disingenuous when we say we have to sell the player on it, but I really think that we have to sell the player on it. Like, we have to get buy-in from him to actually make the change that we think and that we've used evidence to try and back up. And we really think that this could maybe, help him throughout his career. So it's a tough conversation, I think, and it's one that you would have to prepare for. But what does that conversation look like for you, and how do you approach it?
They're really tough conversations, and I think you touched on it. But these guys within the organization aren't choosing us, so it's not like the independent contracting hitting coach that's in the off season to where these guys choose to go to them, and they're way more open. So, I mean, I've listened to many shows that you've had, and the relationship piece always comes up, and that's a huge piece of it, and it's a huge part of it. And so to be able to start that conversation, it's including the hitting coach as much as possible, because they probably have the best relationship with them. And so it's from that, it's learning how to speak to that player, how to talk to that player, how to ask them the right questions to get them to where we want to get them to. But then there also has to be this time of well, maybe we are doing something that isn't very good within the swing, and it absolutely has to be changed. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get to the next level where we want to get to.
Sure.
And I really think that people will knock analytics and knock numbers all the time, and say the game's changing. But if they're used right, there's an extreme advantage that you can have to create the buy-in for the players. And that's what we found the most is like, I'll give you an example of this kind of conversation that happened a couple of years ago. It was a guy that I had, and his chase rates, like, you could see it just by watching the game. Like, he would just swing at everything, right? And before even looking at numbers, you would, just as a general fan, you'd be like, man, he swings at everything. It's like a ball that's two balls above the plate or above the strike zone, he's swinging at. 2 balls below the strike zone, he's swinging at. Inside, outside, off the plate, he's swinging at everything. And you look at him, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. And then it's like, okay, how can we then get to this guy to help him to understand it? Because hard-headed dude who, unless you're presenting some like legitimate facts to him, and you don't have a relationship built up with him, he's not going to listen to anything that you have to say. So through conversations that him and I had in the past, and that I had learned of with the coach, it was like he wanted to be like this best player in the world, best player that ever played. So what we ended up doing is we ended up looking at just like his chase rate, and we have a swing decision metric too, and looking at the swing decisions and how he was doing in terms of that related to everybody else within the league. And sure enough, he was like in 95th percentile of chases, right? So only 5 guys in the league were chasing more than he was. And so that wasn't going to make sense to him, because if you show him that, because he was still doing okay. But the obvious end goal was he needed to chase less. Otherwise, he wasn't going to be able to get to the big leagues and be successful. So what we're able to do then is we're able to track back a couple years earlier and look at all the guys that had chase rates and swing decisions that were similar to his when they were in Double A. So we pull up this list of all the hitters in Double A from a couple years ago and kind of show him where he stacked up. And we kind of look at the list, and there's a bunch of names that are kind of at his level, or maybe a little bit below or a little bit above. And I said, all right, do you recognize these names on this list? Are there guys that you look up to or you think are really good big leaguers? And he's looking, he's like, I don't recognize any of these names. And I said, okay, there's a reason why you don't recognize these names, because these guys haven't had the opportunity, because they chase so much. They've never gotten the opportunity to get to the big leagues and be super successful. They might have a little bit of success here. And if you look at some of their numbers, they had some success here, but the long-term goal of us being the best player in the big leagues, we're going to have to make changes, because these guys don't get to that point to where they're really successful big leaguers if they continue to chase the same way that they do. These guys, you're going to have to make changes. And so from that point on, it was like this light bulb moment in his head that was like, oh, damn, I am having a little bit of success right now, but my goal isn't to be the best Double A player in the world. My goal is to be the best big league player in the world. So if I need to make changes now, it's like, why wait until I get to the big leagues and then I'm on the big stage and I'm trying to make changes then? Why not do it now where I'm in Double A, to where I can make some of these changes to where when I get to the big leagues, I've already known how to do it. And sure enough, like, the conversation was kind of this light bulb moment. He ends up, like, for the rest of the year, I think it was the whole second half, lowered his chase rate by like 7%, which was a huge deal. And sure enough, it was us then having the conversation of it wasn't a swing thing. And that was part of it too, is like, I think when we were looking at the chase, it was it more of a mentality, approach, or mechanical thing that was making him chase? And the cool part was it had nothing to do with the mechanical part. It was a quick, efficient swing. It was just his mentality of an approach of thinking that he could handle everything. So then we break it down and we just start building up and formulating a plan and changing his ideas of what he could do before 2 strikes. And once he did, it was light bulb clicked and he took off. So that's kind of one cool example, I think. But I think that's part of it. And using the numbers, if you can use the numbers and it makes sense, and the players, and you're not overwhelming them with the numbers too. I mean, there's so many numbers that they see all the time anyways. So if you can dummy it down as much as possible and give them just straight hard facts as to this is how it could help, and then this is how we're going to go about the process to improve these numbers. And if you improve these numbers, it's going to improve your overall numbers, then they're bought in and they're all in with the process with you.
I love that. And again, I love getting to hear your process on how you do that, because I think there's a lot of value in drills and there's a lot of value in theory. And then there's another completely separate value in how do we apply and execute. And so getting to hear that and getting to hear you work through that problem, especially with the player, I loved hearing that aspect too, because you involved him. And I think whenever you're involving players, you're going to get more buy-in than just if you're in a higher up role and you could have told him that he had to make these changes, but is he actually going to get buy-in from that? And me, I don't think so. I mean, maybe a little bit, but by you taking that extra time to do your homework and by going to him and asking him what he thought, and especially whenever you asked him, what do you want to be? Like, do you, because there's some guys who are like, I just want to feed my family. Right. And then like you said with him, he wants to be one of the best in the world, which is awesome. And so now you can coach him based on that. And you can say from now on, now you can go to that player and say, hey, is this, you told me on, May 14th, 2020, you wanted to be one of the best in the world. Are you really training like you're one of the best in the world right now? It just is a little added form of motivation. And that's really cool. But
let me add a little bit to this too.
Sure.
So, and I love how you said that, because I think it's kind of our model, I think, within the Blue Jays, and kind of how we help talk to players, and the process is we try and include the players as much as possible. And I think through that, it helps them to be a little bit more bought into the process as well. Because exactly what you said, if you do tell them, it's kind of the old school way of doing it, is tell them, tell them, tell them, tell them, tell them, and eventually they're going to do it. That's not so much the case anymore. And there's so much more access to information that players have, whether it's through Twitter, Instagram, or podcast, or whatever it is. And they already have their own coaches back home too. So if you try and force that process on them without involving them in the process, you're asking for failure, and you're asking to create a divide then between the players and the coaches as well. And as soon as you do that, there's no more of a working relationship, and it's a dictatorship, which is what they don't want. And we want them to be so accountable to their own careers. And I think asking them to be accountable to their own careers, if the action doesn't follow that, and we aren't helping to put them in the process with us, then we're not doing our jobs very well either. So, and there's two, like within that example that I gave, like if I gave him, and if I told him that, and we talked about it at 2 weeks into the season, he's going to look at me like, man, you don't know me. You don't really know what I've done. You don't know, you haven't seen me enough. But giving it to him and us talking about it 4 weeks in, or 4 months in, he's more bought in, because he knows that I do have his best interest at heart. We are working together and trying to figure this thing out. And he knows, because of all the time that I've spent with him, and because of the time the coach has spent with him, they have this clear idea as to, okay, this is really, they're truly genuinely trying to help me here. And then when you, just like what you said, when you use their words, when you use their motivations to help them and help frame what it is that they want to do, then you really got them. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of building up the relationship, and it takes a lot of listening too, and kind of remembering those and putting them in the back of your mind, to where 100%. He just gave me a really, really key thing that he said right there. And I might not use it right now, but in 2 months, when he's struggling, or when we're wanting to do something else, then I can take that little nugget back out, and we can talk about it, and we can start to dissect some of that stuff. And then the changes start to be made there. So yeah, it's a huge, huge piece, and involving the players. I think we try as much as we can to do it, because I think it's huge, and you get a ton more buy-in, and it's their goals, it's their stuff that they're coming up with.
For sure. I love that. So switching gears a little bit, I want to go into, and again, I love that process, and I think really getting to know their why, like you mentioned, you asked them, and I think that for me, early in my career, I just assumed that every player just wanted to be the best version of themselves, and that's not necessarily the case at any level, and especially on the amateur level, some of them just want to be a part of a team. And so that's just something to keep in mind, and a little truth nugget that you're dropping there that obviously that I really appreciate. But another thing that we've got really involved in right now is we've got guys on different parts of the world with some access to some different things, and then others that are literally having to do swing prep with, like we've got guys that are doing swing prep with their socks because they don't have, and throwing it against a wall because they don't have different things. But let's say in an ideal world, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I know every player has kind of a prep routine that they use to get ready for training or the game. What do you do with that? Do you kind of let them do their own thing, or do you guys have a system and process of you guys all do the same things, or then you individualize this part? Just kind of, let's say, before you get into a cage, what does that process look like for you guys in the Blue Jays? And again, just give us what you can, and if you can't, then we'll roll with something else.
For sure. So we've got kind of the way that we do it, and the way that we've experimented with it over the years, the last couple of years, is we've come up with 20 different movement drills that we've just kind of acquired over the course of time. that we as the hitting coaches, we've all just kind of put our heads together and just kind of looked through some of the things that we could possibly do, and just started to film some of that stuff and put them on a database. And then what we do is we'll have a couple days to where we'll just let everybody kind of experiment with each thing, in these 2 or 3 movement drills a day. And then just try and from there start to formulate the plan of, okay, is this something that we could do? Is this something that would work for your swing? And then what we really try and do is, this is really early on, is meet with the players individually, and I'll sit down with the coach and the player, and sometimes the coach will just sit down with the player, and they'll kind of go through some of those movement drills that we've experimented with and say, is this something that you liked? Is this something that you think would help your swing? And a lot of times you'll get, I don't know if that's really going to help. Or sometimes they'll be honest and be like, that's not going to work at all, or I've tried that before. Or then you get the guys that are like, I like this, let's roll with this. And so within that work, then we have our early work. Then I'm thinking of spring training, but we have our early work then. And when guys come out, you'll see probably about 60 to 70% of the guys do some of that prep work that we've kind of come up with. But for us, it's never a thing like, we want all of you guys to do this. We want you to go in the cage and do this drill and this drill and this drill and this drill. It's if you want to, great. If you feel like this is going to help you, and we've kind of set the process up for you to where you understand what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, then great, that's awesome. And if not, then that's fine too, because we'll work with you and we'll figure out what it is that we can do that will be something that you're a little bit more invested in. So
Sure.
We've got some processes in place, and a lot of it too is like, we have player plans for each guy too, and we've got, then on top of the player plans, we've got action plans too that are kind of just like, for instance, like we have, if there's a guy who wants to work on eliminating the push within his swing, we'll have drills, and the coach and the player will come up with drills or different things that they can do on a daily basis to kind of do some of that stuff. So then it becomes very individualized, and it becomes even more individualized, and they get a lot more deeper with it once the year starts, and each hitting coach has their 12, 13 hitters, as opposed to us just really during spring training, just trying to prepare for the year. But so it all builds up to that time during the season to where they do have a little bit more of that time. And then I think it's us working with the S&C coaches, the medical guys, to be able to figure out what are some of the deficiencies that they have within their swing, or within their bodies and their movements, or the way that they can or can't move. And then us talking to them about what we see as being the issue with the swing, and if we can match some of that stuff up and do some prep that the guys can do before they even get in the cage. So I think it's still something that's an evolving process for us too. I think we've gotten a lot better at it over the last year. But a big part of it too was just involving as many people as possible and kind of creating a common language too. Once we created a common language as to how we talked about the swing or the movements of the swing, it became a lot easier too, because then we were all on the same page with how we were speaking about it, instead of having to spend 45 minutes talking about one thing that everybody kind of has an idea, but everybody's not quite sure of. But now we've at least come up with parts of the swing that we understand and we have a clue of, to where when we're having the conversations, they're a lot more streamlined. So to answer your question, we do have some stuff, but it's never things that are like, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. It's more of a grab bag of, these are the different things. This is why you would do this one. This is why you would do this one. Here's what we see with your swing. What do you think about this? How do you think this would play? And then guys kind of grabbing some of that stuff. And you'll see, like, we have AAA guys that'll do, we got big league guys that'll do some of the stuff that they've done throughout the years too.
No, perfect. I love that answer. And again, it's, I've had some conversations with some guys lately for skill acquisition and representative design. And they're anti-T, some of them, or at least to some degree. And I get that to a representative standpoint too. But I mean, it's just like anything else. If it helps the player, and we know that it helps player X, like you watch Pujols and Nelly Cruz, and they're literally like chopping straight down on the ball, but then you look at the end result and you're like, oh, those guys are pretty freaking good. And so it's really interesting to see that. And then you see like the 12-year-old kid who's got a terrible swing and he does that and you're like, oh God, no, like don't, and it's just, cringeworthy moments. But another thing that I'm interested in, just because again, let's approach this kind of like the draft. So you've got some guys that you really like. And then let's say that there's one that is really, really good. Like there's a hitter that you really like, but you see that there's one or two things in his swing that need to be cleaned up. And for our amateur coaches, this could be, let's say you're bringing in a recruit, or let's say you're a high school coach and you're bringing up your player from eighth grade and now he's coming to high school, or even JV to varsity. So you've got some things that you notice right away that you're like, I don't think that's going to work, right?
Yeah.
So what does that conversation look like? Because again, this is the time of year that we're getting into. Do you make changes right away, or do you? Because this is. Let me work through this a little bit with you. This is the double-edged sword, right? You want to see if it actually does work, because there are some really ugly swings in the big leagues who get really great results. But you also don't want them to fail for 2 years, but you also want to get buy-in. So there's all of these different dynamics that are at work.
Yep.
So again, long story short, what's your process there?
This is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because it's something that I've actually been in close contact now that we're not playing the games, obviously, that with our scouting department and preparing for the upcoming draft, and us as a hitting department breaking down some of the swings that we see with some of these amateur guys. And then from there, it's we've been looking at them and saying, with this swing, there's something that's within this swing that we think isn't going to play, or it's going to play, or we're not quite sure. And then what we've started to do is we've started to look at some of these swings, and we've started to then, as a hitting department, look and say, okay, this is something that this guy does in the swing that we don't see too many guys in the big leagues do, or even at the upper levels do. Okay, so that's going to be something that he's going to have to change. Okay, so now if we're thinking of having this guy or requiring this guy on a level of how possible is it to change, whether it's really easy to change, we could change it, but it's going to take some time, to then this is a really easy thing to change. Then we start looking at those sort of things. And then from there, it's like we as a unit, then as hitting coaches, have then all started to look at those sort of things. And then we start to then filter through what it is we like about swings and what it is we don't like about swings, what's hard and what's not hard. And so then when we get guys in the organization, so that's the recruiting part of it, the draft part of it, it's completely separate. But then when we get those guys, it's so much easier, right? Like you see this all the time. You watch a guy swing and you're like, oh man, just change this. You change that, right. You'll be so darn good. And before you have a conversation with them or any of that stuff happens, it seems so easy. And then you get into a cage with them, and boom, you start to include the human element. So we talk about it all the time, but we want guys to be confident. We want them to be self-sufficient. And if we come in right away and we start talking to them about, let's change this, that piece of confidence is just going to be shot straight down. And it might be something that we think isn't going to play in the big leagues, but we're going to at least allow this guy to continue to build up some confidence and to create some self-sufficiency as he gets in the organization. And it goes back to us, I think, doing a really good job of asking questions and building the relationships and building the trust, that we aren't going to go in there right away. And we'll teach and we'll help them to learn a little bit more about just professional baseball in general and what that looks like, and how we can create routines and what we can do from there. But we always talk about it as with the coaches too, is like, at some point, if you've built up enough of a relationship and you've built up the trust enough, they're going to come to you with the question of, what do you think I could change? Or what do you think it is that I need to do a better job of? And as soon as you've done that, and as soon as you got to that point, then boom, you're open. They've opened up the door for you to come through. Now, if you come in really strong and you're saying, okay, you have to change this isn't going to work, you've probably started to close the door a little bit. But if you go in and you start to have that conversation about, okay, well, this is something that I think we see with your swing, and let's watch some big leaguers and let's see how they do it, and let's see if what in comparison your swing looks like to theirs. Who do you like to look up to? Whose swing do you think kind of compares to yours? And you start putting all that stuff together, then I think it becomes a little bit more of a doable process, and then they're a little bit more bought into it. But a lot of the changes I think that we make with guys, um, it comes, you got to catch them at the right time. And then I think a lot of the stuff that we do is more setup based, movement based type changes than it is, like, I would say, overall swing changes. If that makes sense. I think
Absolutely.
it's harder for us as hitting coaches, especially in the daily grind of professional baseball, playing as many games you do. It's like you can try and change swing paths or launches or things like that within the swing, and it's going to take some time, and you're going to get a lot of frustrated players. So I think we try and think of it as much as we can of, if we change a setup, if we change a movement that they have within their gather, is that going to change the ultimate goal of what we're trying to change in the swing? And a lot of times I think we can point back to, yes, it probably will. And those are easier changes to make. But that process is such a long process, and I think it gets overlooked with all the groundwork and the legwork that you have to do before any of that ever happens. So it's something we talk about all the time with
Hmm.
our coaches, and what they're able to dive into with players and include them in that process as well.
Sure, and something that I love that our hitting coordinator Cody Atkinson says is, he's like, guys, you might have to prepare 6 months for a 6 minute conversation, and it's so true, and just goes right in line with what you're talking about too. It's every single question that I've asked you, you've worked a process on how you would answer that, like with a specific player, and so I really do appreciate that, and I think that's because it's all without context, and so I think that it's really neat that you're working through all of these different situations with that, and obviously, I really think that you're answering those and hitting the nail on the head. But another thing that you get the pleasure of doing is helping guys use data to come up with game plans and approaches. And so let's say that, obviously, again, the draft is coming up, and you've got guys who, you may have a high school kid who's never game planned in his life. He just, see it and hit it. And then you've got guys in, let's say, the SEC or the Pac-12 who have a really good idea of what a game plan is. And so how do you approach going over game plans with those guys? And again, this is something that even I'm really trying to dig in on. So I'd love some advice too, from a coordinator position to a coach, on how to make it easy for those guys. So again, dive into what you can, and if you can't, then that's perfectly fine. But just any advice as far as game planning for players, how to simplify it for them, and help them to pay attention to what matters. And then I think that would probably give me some advice as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I've had this conversation with our big league hitting coach, Guillermo, quite a bit. And it's what's really happened over the last couple of years is 2 years ago, when you would have looked at scouting reports, even last year, they would have been so complicated and so convoluted with so much information that I watched it happen so much that players would look at the pages and look at the sheets, and 2 seconds later, they're throwing the sheet to the side and saying, "This is too much. I have no idea what to digest. I have no idea what to take out of this, and I'm going to move on and find something else." So what we've almost started doing is, like, simplifying as much as we could, um, simplifying the process and simplifying the information that we're giving them. So, um, for instance, like, we've talked about this with our meetings that we have at the very lowest levels of the minor leagues. Um, all we're doing, and all the information that we're presenting to them at that point, is more velocity, and then we categorize the fastball as um, a quote unquote rising fastball, a flat fastball, or a fastball that's got depth to it. So we'll categorize those guys in those three different ways. Um, And then all we're trying to do is, especially at the lower levels, get guys to dominate fastballs and be really good at fastballs. So that's more of what we're talking about there. It's fastball velocity and then types of fastballs that they throw. And then from there, they've kind of got this snapshot of, okay, now I know I'm starting to figure out when I look at what this guy has in terms of how his fastball plays. Now I'm matching that up with when I go see it in the game. I'm matching it up with what I read and what it looks like for me. So then from there, at the lower levels, then it's just simple. What other pitches does he throw? Is it a slider, a curveball, changeup, split, whatever? And then they're game planning that way. Now, as we start to go up, as it's high A to double A, that starts to change a little bit. Now we're looking at a little bit more of heat maps with where they're throwing the fastballs. So they've already got this basis of how to know or what to look for with knowing what the fastball does. Now they're starting to look at simple zones as to where they're throwing it. And now they're starting to game plan, and we're helping them to game plan a little bit as to, does that match up with what you do well as a hitter? So I should probably go back a little bit too and talk about, like, one of the things that I think we try and pound into guys too is just be a master of yourself and know yourself better than anybody else does. And part of that process is knowing your heat map, where you're doing the most damage, where you're making the most contact, where you're swinging at the most, where you're swinging and missing the most. So then by that point to where they've got the high A, double A, they've got such a good idea of that whenever they do see scouting reports of heat zones or heat maps as to where the pitcher's throwing it, does it match up with what they want to do? Are they going to have to give a little bit, or is it somebody that sprays it to where they know that I'm just sitting in my zone and I'm okay if he throws one there because eventually he'll come back in my zone? So that's the part I think that's really fun there, and it starts to build a little bit. Then as we get into the AAA big league level, it's even a little bit more advanced from there. But for the most part, they've built up this knowledge and this knowledge base of what to pick out and what to look for when they do look at a scouting report, and what words they're grabbing onto, and then they're forming their own opinions on it. Where it's like, I think when we're in college, we're coaching in college, it's more of this process of we're game planning as a group. And we have a little bit of that early on in professional baseball, but as they get older, it's they're game planning for themselves as opposed to us game planning as a group. And each guy kind of has this idea as to the type of pitchers they do really well against, the type of pitchers they've struggled against, why they've struggled. And then when they're looking at the scouting reports, they're trying to figure out in their own mind, when we're giving them this information, when they're looking at the sheets, they're trying to figure out how that matches up to what they can do and what they can't do.
Great answer. Great answer. And so now I'm going to flip the question on you a little bit. So now we're in the middle of a game. What does that conversation look like? So let's say, Hunter, I'm one of your players, and I'm like over 3 with 3 punch outs, and I'm pissed, right? And I'm like, dang, what, so, and I come up to you and I'm walking around the dugout and I'm pissed, and I take off my gloves, and then I come up to you and this is the question I think that we always get, and it's, hey, what do you got? Like, what do you see? And immediately I think players go to mechanics, right? Because obviously that's the cure all be all that everybody thinks is the problem. But again, this is so context dependent, and so I appreciate me throwing these questions at you and you working through them so well. But what do in-game and dugout conversations look like for you, and what have you found to be kind of the right way to gear the conversation towards something that's helpful versus them queuing themselves up at the plate and not being successful at all?
Yeah. That's a tremendous question. I think it gets overlooked quite a bit. So let me backtrack a little bit to explain partly why I love the job that I have now. Is I get to go to each affiliate and watch how each hitting coach gets to coach. And it's something that you hardly ever got to do, right? As a hitting coach, I never got to see how other guys did it. You could see kind of across the way and kind of watch what the other hitting coach is doing and ask questions, but you never get to see a coach in the moment and see what they're doing. And our double A hitting coach that we have now, his name's Matt Young. He's in high A last year. And getting to see him and see this in action every single day with how he worked with players during the game um, is one of the best I've ever seen at it. And we've talked about it a lot as a group, but these sorts of conversations and how to have these sorts of conversations. And the thing that I've learned from him and that he's really good at is it's such a simple little thought, and it's a nugget, and it's that one guy that comes up to you and you've got this relationship, you know everything about this guy, and he asks you and he's like, man, what do you got for me? Like, what is going on? And it's this one little nugget. It's this one thing that gets him back going. And a lot of times it has nothing to do, right, with the pitcher that they're facing or anything like that. It's just this one little cue, this one little nugget. And he's so good at it because there's never more than one thing that he says. It gets them back to this good feeling that they had whenever they were going really well. And I think those conversations start with and end with knowing what it was when they were going really well, that one word, that one cue, whatever it was, to get them back going. And you say it back at that point when they're really struggling in the heat of the battle. And it's this one thing that gets them going. And to me, that's like the art of coaching, is knowing that word or knowing that phrase or whatever it is with each of your individual guys that you can throw at them in those sorts of situations. And 95% of the time, it's the same stuff that works every single time. And it's just a little reminder that helps them to kind of take a step back and remember what it is that they're feeling or what it is that they're doing when they're really struggling. And I think the other part of it too is how it's presented as the coach, right? It's like, we had a guy a couple years ago when I was coaching in Double A, and he wanted to ask all sorts of questions. He always asked them at the wrong times too, like right in the middle of the game. And he's wanting to have conversations with you about his swing and everything. And so we came up with this thing to where his whole idea was he wanted to hit a ball over the center fielder's head. And we figured out over the course of time that why it worked so well for him was hitting a ball over the center fielder's head allowed him to, one, have some intent to the swing because he had to hit it over somebody's head. Two, it had to get the pitcher kind of in the middle of the plate because getting the middle of the plate then allowed him to get a ball over the center fielder's head. And then the third part of it is it gave him direction with his swing, so he could work a little bit more up the middle and he wouldn't run out of barrel. So there were three parts to it. So instead, and we learned this over the course of time, so it always got him right. And instead of what he would want at the start of the year is he would want something that he'd be like, man, what do you got for me? Like, what is going on? And what he was always trying to get out of you was for you to break down the pitch selection, to break down his intent, to break down the swing. And I was like, man, if I tell you like, okay, I want you to go up there and I want you to think of getting a ball in the middle of the plate, and I want you to think of swinging and hitting it really hard, and I want you to keep this direction towards the middle of the field. I want you to drive it to the big part because you'll be able to hit an extra base hit or whatever, and that's what we need for your swing. If we tell him that, or if we tell him, hey, just hit a ball over the center fielder's head, there's two ways of doing it, and there's two ways of presenting it to him. One of them, he's going to walk to the plate like, oh man, I've now got five thoughts that I'm trying to sort through in my head, as opposed to I've got this one thing that I am trying to do when I go up there, and knowing that that gets him right. And it's the way that you do it too. It's like we have so many coaches, like our AAA guy, Corey Hart's tremendous at this too, is keeping the mood light enough and to where the guys aren't taking themselves too serious in the heat of the battle, but then having this confidence within himself when he's presenting something to the players that when they hear it from him, one, they feel like he's right in it with them. And two, they feel so secure because he's so secure with what he's saying. So there is a little bit of this placebo effect at times when like you just want those guys to get results at that time. Like, yeah, there might be something that's going wrong with the swing, but we can't address that right now. Let's just get you back going and feeling good. And then tomorrow before the game, we can start to work through some of this too. There's a time and place for it. But the way that you present it, the way that it's brought to them, it's all of it goes into it to go up there and just get your best swing off when you want to.
No doubt, no doubt. And so again, for a different layer to that question, what about when guys have been struggling for, let's say 10, 15 games, and they come and they say, hey Hunter, can you help me with this? And where do you kind of start with that conversation? Do you just kind of walk us through that, because that's something I'm also curious about. It's different in game than it is when you actually have time to work through some stuff, which I think is so cool. But it is
Yeah.
also adds another layer of complexity to our job. But what does that process look like?
So I'll answer this a little bit. I think it's easier to answer it as the hitting coach as opposed to the hitting coordinator. But because
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
as the hitting coach, you're in it with them, right? So you're in it and you're grinding through it and you're seeing the struggles, you're seeing the ups and downs. I think that process looks a little bit differently, obviously, and it's you kind of set it up perfectly, because if you are getting them at the point where they're saying, okay, what do we got? What can I do differently? What can I change? You've got them at a point that you've built up the relationship and the trust enough to where they're ready to go. And I think the first piece then comes with, okay, what are we struggling with? And then it's this simple back and forth conversation. Okay, perfect. We're struggling with that. Okay, what are you feeling? What are you feeling at the plate that's not allowing you to do the things that you had been able to do? Okay, it's this, it's this, it's this. Okay, in the past, when you're going really good, what is it that you're feeling? It's this, it's this, it's this, it's this. Okay, so now we've created this conversation, this dialogue, and we're starting to build up this change model of what we're going through and how we're going to start to go through this process of needing to change and wanting to change things we want to. So we've had that conversation. So now we will most likely go to like video and watch video and pull up video, and we'll watch. Okay, we're struggling with this, you said, right? And okay, let's watch some pitches. Let's watch some stuff from the side. Let's watch some stuff from the front. Let's break this down, and we'll see where the breakdown starts in the swing. Okay, beautiful. We're starting to see it right here. Okay, now let's look at when you were going really good. Is there a difference? Yeah, there is a little bit of difference. Okay, but can we make a change back to that, or do we want to take a step forward and say that was great, but I still think there's more? So from there, it's okay. We've now, without even getting into a cage, we've had the conversation and dialogue of everything that you need to know about the player, and then we started to diagnose it and started to come up with a game plan by watching the film. We haven't gotten the cage yet, but we've done those things. Now it's let's go in the cage. Let's figure this out. And for the affiliate hitting coaches and hitting coaches that are on the ground floor with the players, it's you have all this time, and it's and I'm sure you've seen this, but if you just simply ask a player, like, hey man, like, why don't you, and you're proactive with it as a coach too. And it's like, hey, come in tomorrow at 1 o'clock and we'll get in the cage and we'll work and we'll try and work through some stuff. That means so much to the players. It really does. And they see it, man, they care about me. They care about my career and what I'm doing. So, and then getting to that point, so you've built up the video, you've built up the relationship, you've built up the plan. Now it's okay, let's come to the cage early tomorrow and let's start to work. And now it's this idea of let's experiment, let's do some different things. We kind of have an idea as to how we want it to feel. Let's match up what we want it to look like with how we want it to feel, and we'll go from there. One of the things that in changing, and especially I talked about us changing movements and changing setups, one of the things that we've found to have a ton of success with is just video delay. And this is kind of always the start of the changes that we make and the changes that players make is we now know if we start to look and we have this idea and this understanding of this is what it should look like, we'll set up an iPad with a video delay on it. It's like a 3 or 4 second delay, and we'll put it on the side. And the hitter has this idea of this is what it's supposed to look like. So they'll take a swing, 3 or 4 seconds later, the video plays, and they watch it, and they're like, man, that doesn't look anything like I thought that felt. So it's like, okay, I know what it's supposed to look like. Let me change. Let me do something different. Okay, boom, I take a swing. 3 or 4 seconds later, I see it, and I'm like, okay, that looks a little bit more like how I wanted it to look. Okay, so then it's the coach's job to say, okay, that's how you wanted it to look. Okay, beautiful. We've got it. Now, take me through how that felt. And they're like, well, I feel like my hands are like, my hands are above my ear and I feel like I'm chopping straight down to it. and say, okay, well, if that's how it looks and that's how it feels, then we're going to roll with that feel. Okay, so now we're doing this back and forth action of the video delay, feeling something, watching it, feeling something, watching it, matching it up, and now we've started to integrate this feel. And when we talk about being self-sufficient, that's the biggest piece and the biggest key to this, because now they've then taught themselves what it is that they need to feel, and it's the coach's job then, it's our jobs to then just facilitate the conversation to where they then understand what it is that they need. So it's a super long process, obviously. But once we get to that point, they've then started to make those changes. And then through that process, then as the coach, let's say it was hands above or hands up, chop down, whatever it was. And then that's how you then have those conversations, start the conversation in the dugout too. It's like they come back and it's like, man, I feel out of whack. And you knew that when they were working, all they wanted to do was feel hands up and chop down, come to you. And it's like, man, hey, put your hands up, chop down. That's it. It's easy. It's simple. Go out and execute it. And because you spent so much time in the cage, because you spent so much time working with them to try and figure some of that stuff out, those conversations become a lot easier.
Yeah, I love that, and sorry, I'm chuckling a little bit because there was a video that came out with Christian Yelich. I don't did
Yeah.
you see it where he
Oh
did the
yeah.
interview with
Oh
Barry
yeah.
Bonds, or he talked about Barry Bonds' drill? Anyways, for our listeners, I don't want this to be an inside joke, but you talked about chopping down, and we've talked about this a couple times, but there's a video, and I'll link it in the show notes. But essentially, Bonds was having Yelich chop down and try and hit the ball literally on top of the plate, and now he says that when things are going wrong, that's the thing that he goes to, which I thought was so super interesting, because it's like, and then he also proceeds to say that Bonds got in there and within like two swings he was able to actually hit the plate, which is freaking crazy. But
Yeah.
I don't want to take too long on that. But I thought, I just, whenever you started talking about hands up, chopping down, that's immediately what I thought of, and again, that's really cool. But I know you got to run. But I got a couple quick hitters for you, and we'll do, this will kind of be our lightning section. So answer these. You don't necessarily have to answer them as fast as you can, but just just some brief questions about some
Okay.
different things that you're digging into. So the first question that I have for you is, what is the latest thing that you've learned that you're really excited about?
Listened. So my wife gets mad at me if I say I read, but I listened to the audiobook Range. And we've got a little one too, but just this idea of experimenting and going from different things and learning as much as you can about different movements and different pieces of life. That's the thing that I'm really intrigued by right now. And from a learning standpoint within the organization, something that we're really digging into as well.
Fantastic. Now, this question, it's a little bit, it's tough to kind of explain, but we all know what the answer is, or at least something that comes to mind. But what's something that you guys do in training, or you do in training, whether that be with the Blue Jays or elsewhere, that you know that the players love? So you've got like one drill or one competition that if you brought it to the field to tomorrow, which I wish, if you brought it to the field tomorrow, you know that the players would be so into it.
So we any sort of competition that we can do and we can set up is probably the best. We've Whenever we bring out the Rapsodo, or we've got a hit tracks that we had in one of our camps last year, setting that up and actually playing a game and working through a game with them, that is, like, it seems, without failure, it's something that guys get so excited about and hyped up with, that it's something that we try and do as much as possible, because I think competition is something that we love. So um, I would. It's simple. It's easy. It's competition. It gets guys firing, and if you set up the parameters and the constraints the right way, you're going to get something out of it too.
I love it. And last one is, what are some of your favorite books and resources? I know that you mentioned Range already, but are there any other ones that have helped shape your coaching career?
Um, so I think Instagram and Twitter, I think, are huge pieces, and I've built up relationships with people through that. In terms of books, like man, my library of what I've learned and what I've what I've picked up on in college was huge. And when I was getting my master's in sports psychology, I think like where I would find some of the best information was just in some of the counseling psychology books that I would read that had nothing to do with sport, nothing to do with baseball. So those were some that, like even some textbook stuff that I read way back in the day. But range is, and it's just my recency bias of what I've most recently listened to and read. But range is something that I've been really into and really engaged in. And then podcasts. I love listening to podcasts because it's one thing to just read something. It's another thing, I think, to hear somebody kind of explain it and talk through some of their trials and tribulations of the things that they've done. I really enjoy doing that. And two, I think the good old telephone and just reaching out to somebody and talking to them and asking them like what they've done and what's worked for them and what hasn't worked. I think that's still probably the best way to do it because you're going to get some real life experiences that have worked.
I love it. And so what I'm going to do is I know you have to run. I'm going to link your Twitter account in the show notes. So if there's anyone who wants to get in touch with you, they could probably do that there, I'm assuming. And then just, is there anything else? I'm going to open up the mic for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners before you go?
I think the biggest piece, and I get asked this question a lot by young coaches and a lot of times parents too of players. I think like one of the things that we as a hitting society do way too much of is overcomplicate things. And it happens with all of us at some point or another. And I think the more and more we get into all of the data, the more and more we get into all the tech and what's going on Twitter, what's going on Instagram when it comes to the swing, I think the more and more we as coaches, then we start to question ourselves and we start to become a little bit skeptical of what we believe and what we don't believe. So I would say that like to any coach that's out there, to any parent that's out there, it's like, put the kid or put the player at the very center of what it is that you're doing and then work from there. I think we too many times just try and look for the what. We try and look for that magic pill that is that one thing that's going to help a hitter that's going to get to the big leagues or help a hitter that's a young kid if you're a parent to get to whatever it is that they want to do. And there's no magic formula. There's no magic pill. It's different for everybody. It's different for all the kids. I think like the one thing that I would then continue to say is enjoy what you're doing. And if you can create an environment, you can create a culture within your small group, whether it's you're a parent creating the environment, the culture to have fun and enjoy it so they keep doing it, or whether it's in the big leagues and you're creating the environment to where they want to come to the cage, they want to have conversations with each other every day, then do it, because that's going to keep them coming back. That's going to keep them wanting more. And if you've done that at any level, you've done your job. And so I would say that I think like we overlook a lot of that way too much, and we get so consumed with mechanical pieces of it. And the swing has to look this way. It has to start this way. It has to work this way. It's not always like that. And I think to get past that point is challenging because there is so much information out there. And I tell people all the time, if I was a hitter right now, because I am so curious about stuff sometimes, is I would have a hard time deciphering through, if I'm going through and looking at Twitter, Instagram, I would have a hard time deciphering what it is that really works for me and what doesn't work for me. And I would need a coach to help me kind of decipher some of that. Otherwise, I would be completely lost. So I think like for the coaches to put the player first, create the environment, create the setting, and I think everything else will be successful.
Thank you for listening to Ahead of the Curve. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, which could include Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, or YouTube. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it on social media to help get the word out. Once again, thank you for joining us.